Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We've got some great content lined up for you. My name is Bridget Arnott. I'm part of the BEC Technology team and wanted to give you a quick rundown of some housekeeping announcements. So we'll be hearing from Casey Wilt on GC estimation, a trio of approaches, where he'll go through some different methods for calculating general conditions in an estimate. So have your pen and paper out. He'll be showing you a few cool things. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, there is a question box in your webinar panel. You can enter them there. We'll get to as many as we can. If perhaps we missed anything, we will follow up once the webinar is complete to make sure all of those get addressed. And before we kick off here, wanted to reference, we have Pre-Con World coming up. So BECTEC's big event, October 16th and 17th. It'll be in Arlington at the Lowe's Hotel. On your screen is the URL or link to register. And since you're on this call today, we wanted to offer you a discount of 20% off the registration. So if you're inclined, would like to join us for some great content sessions, small group discussions, networking opportunities, and then our final day is a pre-con peer day. Please use the code BTWebinar2024 at event.bectechnology.com/precon, or you can just go to BEC Technology and drop down the resources tab. You'll see it there. All right, so let's get it kicked off. I'm going to turn it over to Casey.
There we go. There is screen share, should be up. All right. Good morning. My name is Casey Wilt. I'm a senior sales engineer here at BEC Technology, and I spent 8 years on the implementation side of our business. In that time period, you know, part of the secret sauce for most organizations is the way that you handle general conditions estimating, right? This has always been something that may be a sidebar effort. Maybe there's an individual who's kind of the guru for it within your organization. You know, it's always been treated as this extra step in estimating. And what I'd like to show today is a few different approaches to take that sidebar effort and incorporate that into the core estimating workflows within DESTINI Estimator. So the first workflow here on the screen, you should be seeing a couple of line items, one that is a lump sum for general conditions and one that's a lump sum for general requirements. The workflow for populating these items for kind of this first pass is going to be very heavily template driven. What I mean by that is we're going to grab quantity information and cost information from the project view. This first workflow is probably the most clear translation of my existing Excel sheet into DESTINI Estimator. So as we jump to the project view itself, what you should be seeing at the top here is a staffing calculator. This is something I've created. This type of exercise is very common. Each type of staff member listed on the left-hand side with their hourly rate for year one, the different months for year one, and then your kind of input into this is to say how many full-time equivalents of project manager do I have in March of year one. Repeat for each staff member for each month. The result is the number of full-time equivalents, kind of the full-time months, times how many hours per month you track within your traditional calculator, giving us total hours and total cost as hours times rate. A question that commonly comes up is how do I handle year two, year three for these large multi-phase projects? An example of this in this calculator is to carry the year one rate plus some amount of inflation to project for times forward, and then continue with the kind of full-time equivalency math for each of your staff members. So the top of this table is really kind of the calculator, and down below we get into some of the summations and additional math for general requirements. On the left-hand side, I've got a summary of my different staff members, their total hours across multiple years, their total cost, and in between is really the functional rate that is applied. So for example, project executive is $100 in year one for 10 months. It's $103 for 2 months of year two. The actual rate averages out to $101.20. Now, in this workflow, all I care about is the total cost of staffing. So any cell in the project view that you see highlighted pink means it has been tagged and attached to a property. So the 726, you can see on the right, GC total gives me 726,000. In this example, the project view is also handling the general requirements, kind of those operating expenses, like job site trailers, temporary utilities, et cetera, et cetera. These guys are actually reading the construction duration in months, right? So there's some Excel logic in play, meaning that this should translate nicely in your head from my existing Excel template into the project view. On the line items themselves, you can see general conditions as a one lump sum has the exact unit cost of 726, and general requirements carries the 780. If I expand the layout, you can really see how this is happening. So general conditions, labor cost is actually formulaic. So a project property can be put into a cost category field. So I have a one lump sum with a unit cost in labor of whatever that grand total was from my project view. For general requirements, I've put everything in other. Some groups have split out those general requirements calculations into an equipment total, a materials total, an other total. Your mileage may vary, right? It's kind of flavor preference from there. So that's option one. Kind of bring in your Excel sheet, let it do its full summation, it's always done, and then choose the level of detail you want to see in the estimate view. These could also be entered as lump sum fees in the fee table if you prefer to see them below the line and don't necessarily need fees to calculate against them. Option two, as I pull this one up, looks and feels very familiar in the project view itself. The difference is, rather than just tracking the category totals of staffing and general requirements, I've tagged a lot more cells. So in this workflow, as we'll see in the estimate view in a few minutes, I actually want to carry line item detail for each staff member for each general requirements element. So the GR's math has been removed, right? So we've kind of simplified the calculator, and now we can go look at what happens in the estimate view. To track something across, for project executive, you can see I have the 86.6 hours tracked as the PX hours property and the PX rate of 101.20 as PX rate repeated for every staff member. When we jump to the estimate view, we can see a detailed line item for each of my staff members, and I can see a detailed line item for those same general requirements items. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, obviously, but representative of kind of both sets of data. If we expand this layout to show you what's happening, you can see that the quantity field for each of the staff members is driven by their hours property. So the same, 86.6. My estimate view, I've rounded off the quantities. The labor cost is reading the PX rate, and I'm getting the same 87.70 here in the aggregate cost that is shown here in the project view. Down in the general requirements section, this is even simpler to set up. These are just line items that have been added to the estimate view. Their formula is simply construction duration. We have one trailer, so it's easy. 1 times construction duration gives me 12 months of trailer at whatever unit cost I carry from my database as you work through it. So this is kind of option two, right, where you've run a slightly simpler calculator and you're showing the full detail in the estimate view. Again, this is a flavor of GC estimating and presentation that some groups prefer to send with their deliverables. Now, I mentioned these are template driven. One thing I wanted to point out with this many detailed line items, right, where this is 20 or 30 items, you may have 150 or 200. These line items would be added to your estimate template so that every time you start the project, they're already in place, they already have their formulas. All you have to do is come in and fill out the appropriate values in the calculator itself. Everything else is already linked up. There's a third workflow, and this one has nothing to do with templates at all. This allows you to bring in general conditions into any estimate in a Q&A process. And the way to do that is via assemblies. The assembly I'm going to run here, the staffing assembly as it pulls up, this is part of the Destiny Hub library of assemblies. If you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to reach out to your customer success team, and they can get you more information on what that library looks like and how it might benefit your team. As I look at the staffing assembly, it's going to be the same type of questions as the project view, but in a more kind of traditional linear fashion. So let's just say the same 12 months of duration. We have one project director for 20% of his time, one PX for 10% of her time, a senior project manager for 80% of their time, one full-time PM, no APMs, and we would like 4 project engineers. So I'm just tabbing through saying what % of their time over the 12 months should be dedicated to this effort. And on the right, you can see I have a detailed line item for every percentage entry that I've made. So for example, for 4 project engineers, I have 4 line items, each at the 100% mark of the 12 months. When I click Add to Estimate, if we were to have it grouped by, let's say, master format 1 and 2, you'll see all the detailed line items that came out of that questionnaire that we ran through. So this is starting to look kind of like workflow number 2 without any of the project view setup involved. One thing to keep in mind when you have multiple instances of a line item is you can always toggle line item rollup, and it will collapse those like items to show their quantities as a kind of an aggregation. The cool thing about doing this as an assembly, especially for internal review, if you have a junior estimator who's kind of branching out into this very important part of the process, is if you group by assembly, you can quickly come back to the assembly, it populates the questions, and you can make decisions, right? Well, this is how I got to where I was. Well, we forgot about a project accountant. We need one of those for 50% of their time, and now we've captured the full scope. When we click update, now the project accountant is in there for 6 months. So that's kind of where the assembly can be this beautiful kind of training and teaching tool as you work through it. The last thing I wanted to show is if I go back to this more detailed estimate, there's a way you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. And that comes through the standard reports in DESTINI Estimator. So let's say I have my couple hundred items for GCs and GRs. I like seeing the detail, but I don't want to expose that in my deliverable. I ran a report against this estimate. On the left-hand side in the parameters, I've grouped by master format 1 and master format 2. And when we look at the detail section, we see exactly what the estimate view showed. General requirements, admin requirements, line item details, rates, etc. In these reports, something that not everyone takes advantage of is the ability to actually roll up specific subsets of your data. So underneath master format level 2, let's say for this deliverable, I want admin requirements to be a 1-line total. I can say roll up 0130, click submit, and now in my report, the detail exists in my estimate, but in the deliverable I'm sending to the owner, admin requirements is simply accounted for without exposing detail. Maybe you want everything in Division 1 to do that. Great. We'll kind of hit both sections here so you can see it. And here is my detailed GRs and GCs shown as kind of 2 lump sum totals. So an option for you in the reports, that way you can, whether it's through assemblies or kind of the full detailed estimating process, those mission critical GCs and GRs are in Estimator, single source of truth in whatever workflow kind of fits your team the best. So those are the workflows I wanted to show this morning. Bridget, I'll kind of hand it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Casey. You got some great information there. Thank you for sharing. It looks like we've addressed the questions that have come in. If you have anything you'd like to ask Casey before we sign off, please drop it in the questions box on your webinar panel, and we'll be sure to follow up with you. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great Friday. Signing off.